I never thought the quiet, tree-lined streets of Maplewood Estates would become my personal battleground. The first time I noticed the black SUV crawling past my house, I dismissed it as someone lost in our suburban maze. But when it returned the next day, parking across from my driveway while a man in what looked like a knockoff police uniform took photos of my front yard, I knew something wasn't right. My name is Lucas Osborne, and for the past 8 months, I've been living in what I can only describe as a suburban nightmare. It all started with a simple fence, a 6-foot cedar privacy fence I installed around my backyard last spring. According to my property documents, surveys, and the city permits I'd obtained, everything was by the book. But according to Pamela Wilson, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood's HOA, I had committed the cardinal sin of Maplewood Estates. That fence became the opening shot in a war I never asked to fight. I had moved to Maplewood Estates in Fairfield, Connecticut, about 18 months ago after landing a software engineering position at a tech company in nearby Stamford. The neighborhood seemed perfect good schools for when I eventually started a family, reasonable property taxes, and just enough space between houses to feel like I had my own sanctuary. The homeowners association fees seemed a bit steep at $425 a month, but the amenities, a community pool, tennis courts, and well-maintained common areas made it worth it. Or so I thought. When I first met Pamela at the mandatory new homeowner orientation, she seemed pleasant enough. Mid-50s, immaculately highlighted blonde bob, constantly clutching a leather portfolio embossed with the Maplewood Estates logo. She walked me through the 78-page HOA covenant with the intensity of someone explaining nuclear launch codes. "We take pride in maintaining property values here," she said, tapping a manicured nail against a particularly dense paragraph about exterior paint colors. "I've been president of the board for 11 years, and in that time, our home values have increased 87%. I nodded politely, skimming the documents while mentally planning where I'd put my home office. I should have paid more attention. For my first 6 months, I flew under the radar. I mowed my lawn on the prescribed schedule, didn't leave my trash cans out past 7 p.m. on collection day, and kept my Christmas lights within the approved December 1st to January 5th window. Then spring came, and with it, my desire for privacy in my backyard. The day after my fence was completed, I found the first notice taped to my front door. Violation, unauthorized fence installation, immediate removal required. It was printed on official-looking Maplewood Estates letterhead and signed by Pamela Wilson, HOA president. I called the number listed that same day, confused since I had submitted all the proper paperwork to the HOA Architectural Review Committee months earlier and received approval before proceeding. "Hello, Pamela. This is Lucas Osborne at 47 Oak Ridge Lane. I received a violation notice about my fence, but I'm a bit confused since I got approval from the committee back in January." There was a long pause before she responded. "Mr. Osborne, the approval was for a 4-foot fence with specific picket spacing. What you've constructed is a 6-foot solid privacy fence, completely different. But the plans I submitted clearly showed—" "I have the plans right in front of me," she interrupted, "and they absolutely do not indicate what you've built. You have 7 days to remove it and install the approved design, or you'll face daily fines of $150. I was stunned. I knew exactly what I had submitted: detailed drawings, material specifications, even color samples. I had the stamped approval in my files. "I'll stop by the HOA office tomorrow with my copy of the approved plans," I said, keeping my voice level. "That won't be necessary." "The committee's decision is final," she replied before hanging up. The next day, I took the afternoon off work and went to the small HOA office located in our community center. Pamela wasn't there, but the administrative assistant, Linda Zhao, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, helped me look through my file. "That's strange," she said, frowning at the computer screen. Your original submission is here, but the approved plans show a different fence design than what you submitted, and the approval letter has different specifications than your original request. Can you print both for me? I asked. Linda glanced over her shoulder before lowering her voice. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but you're not the first person to have this problem. Pamela sometimes makes adjustments to submissions after they're approved. That sounds illegal, I said. Linda just handed me the printouts. I'm just saying be careful. She takes the HOA very seriously. I thanked her and left with copies that clearly showed tampering. My original submission was for a 6-foot privacy fence. The approved version that Pamela was now claiming I had violated showed a decorative 4-foot picket fence. Rather than confronting Pamela directly, I decided to email the entire HOA board with copies of both documents attached. I believe there's been some confusion regarding my fence approval, I wrote, keeping my tone professional. As you can see from the attached documents, my original submission was for the fence that was actually installed. I'm not sure how the discrepancy occurred, but I wanted to clear this up before any unnecessary actions were taken. 3 board members responded with varying degrees of confusion and concern. 2 others, who I later learned were Pamela's closest allies, remained silent. The next morning, I received a call from Thomas Henderson, the board's vice president. Lucas, I've looked into this situation, and you're right, there seems to be some discrepancy. I've put a hold on any fines or enforcement actions until we can discuss this at the next board meeting. In the meantime, your fence can stay. I felt relieved, but that relief was short-lived. The next day, I came home to find a man in a navy blue uniform similar to a police officer's but not quite right standing at my front door. The patch on his arm read, Maplewood Security Enforcement. Mr. Osborne? He asked as I approached. He was tall, probably in his 40s, with a military-style haircut and mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Reynolds with Maplewood Security. I'm here regarding multiple covenant violations on your property. He handed me a stack of papers that looked like citations. I flipped through them, bewildered. In addition to the fence issue, I was now supposedly in violation for improper lawn edging, unauthorized porch furniture, and excessive vehicle parking. I had 3 friends over for a barbecue the previous weekend. What is this? And who exactly are you? I've never heard of Maplewood Security Enforcement. We're contracted by the HOA to handle covenant enforcement, he said, his voice flat. These violations total $1,750 in fines. Payment is due within 10 days or we'll proceed with further action. What kind of action? I asked, increasingly unsettled by his official demeanor despite the obvious fact that he wasn't actual law enforcement. The HOA has the authority to place liens on your property and, in some cases, initiate foreclosure proceedings. I suggest you comply. He adjusted his belt, which I noticed held what looked like handcuffs and a taser. Are you carrying weapons? I asked incredulously. Standard equipment for security personnel, he replied. Sign here to acknowledge receipt of these citations. I refused to sign. I'm going to need to verify all of this with the HOA board. This seems highly irregular. He pushed the papers toward me again. Refusal to acknowledge receipt will be noted as an additional violation. I think you should leave my property now, I said firmly. Unless you're actual law enforcement with a warrant, you have no right to demand anything from me. He stared at me for a long moment, then tucked the papers into a leather portfolio similar to Pamela's. I noted and walked back to the black SUV parked at the curb. As he drove away, I took photos of the vehicle and its license plate. That night, I researched Connecticut laws regarding homeowners associations and private security companies. What I discovered was troubling. While HOAs did have enforcement powers through liens, and even potential foreclosure for unpaid dues or fines, they had no authority to employ armed security personnel who presented themselves as law enforcement. Additionally, The state required security guards to be licensed, with strict regulations about identifying themselves as private security rather than police. I called Thomas Henderson again, this time more upset. Did you know the HOA has hired armed security guards who are presenting themselves as some kind of police force? There was a long silence. Lucas, the board approved hiring a security company for the neighborhood about 6 months ago, but they're supposed to be patrolling common areas and checking for things like pool passes. They absolutely shouldn't be issuing citations or carrying weapons. Can you send me photos of the documents you received? I did, along with the pictures of the security vehicle. Thomas promised to look into it immediately. The next morning was Saturday, and I was enjoying coffee on my controversial front porch when another black SUV pulled up. This time, 2 men in the same Navy uniforms approached my house. I recognized one as Reynolds from the day before. The other was younger, heavily muscled with a buzz cut and an aggressive stride. "Mr. Osborne," Reynolds called out, "we need you to come with us to the HOA office to discuss your ongoing violations." I stayed seated. "I'm not going anywhere with you. If the HOA wants to meet, they can send a proper invitation." The younger guard stepped forward. "Sir, we have the authority to detain residents who are in violation of community covenants. Please don't make this difficult." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You have absolutely no legal authority to detain anyone. You're not law enforcement. If you try to touch me or enter my property without permission, I'll call the actual police and file charges for assault and trespassing." Reynolds' face flushed with anger. "The HOA bylaws give us the authority." "No, they don't," I interrupted. "I've read them cover to cover. Nothing in there gives private security guards the right to detain homeowners. Now, please leave my property." Instead of leaving, the younger guard stepped onto my porch. "You need to come with us now, sir." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "That's assault." "Leave now or I'm calling 911. "Go ahead," he said with a smirk. "We have an understanding with the local police. They know we handle HOA matters internally." I dialed 911 anyway, keeping the phone on speaker. When the dispatcher answered, I clearly stated, "I need police at 47 Oak Ridge Lane in Maplewood Estates. 2 men claiming to be security are trying to forcibly remove me from my home." The younger guard's confidence faltered slightly, but Reynolds stepped forward. "Sir, we're not leaving without you. The HOA president has authorized us to bring you in for a hearing." "This isn't a totalitarian regime," I replied. "The HOA can't authorize kidnapping." We stood in tense silence for the 12 minutes it took for a Fairfield Police Department cruiser to arrive. Officer Martinez was professional but clearly confused by the situation. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking between me and the 2 security guards. Reynolds immediately adopted a more collegial tone. "Officer, we're just handling an HOA matter with a difficult resident. Nothing to be concerned about." I showed Officer Martinez the citations and explained how they were trying to force me to go with them. Her expression darkened as she examined their uniforms, which I now realized were deliberately designed to look similar to police uniforms. "May I see some identification?" she asked them. "And any documentation authorizing you to detain residents?" Reynolds produced a security guard license, but the younger man seemed to hesitate before showing his. Officer Martinez studied them carefully, then made a call on her radio. After a brief conversation, she turned back to us. "Gentlemen, you need to leave this property immediately. Mr. Osborne is under no obligation to go anywhere with you, and I'll need to see documentation about your employment arrangement with the HOA and what exactly you've been authorized to do." Reynolds started to protest, but Officer Martinez cut him off. "This isn't a discussion. Leave now, or you'll be arrested for trespassing and potential impersonation of a law enforcement officer, which is a felony in Connecticut." They left, but not before Reynolds gave me a look that promised this wasn't over. Officer Martinez took my statement and copies of all the documents, including the modified fence approval. "This is concerning," she said. "It sounds like your HOA may be overstepping their authority significantly. I'd recommend consulting with an attorney who specializes in HOA law." I took her advice and scheduled a consultation with a lawyer named Michael Fisher for the following Monday. In the meantime, I emailed the entire HOA board again, this time detailing the security guard's attempt to forcibly remove me from my home and the police response. The weekend passed without incident, but Monday morning brought another unwelcome surprise. As I was leaving for work, I found my car blocked in by the now familiar black SUV. Reynolds was leaning against it, arms crossed. "Mr. Osborne, the HOA board has called an emergency meeting regarding your violations. You're required to attend at 10 a.m. today." I checked my email on my phone. "I've received no notification of any meeting." "Notice was posted at the community center as required by the bylaws," he replied. "Your presence is mandatory." "I have work," I said, "and I'm not skipping it for an improperly noticed meeting." "Now please move your vehicle, you're blocking my driveway." "If you fail to attend, the board will proceed with maximum penalties," he warned. "Then they'll be proceeding illegally," I replied. "Move your vehicle now or I'll call Officer Martinez again. I have her direct number." He stared at me for a long moment before slowly getting back in the SUV and driving away. I was late for work and increasingly stressed about the situation, but I was determined not to be intimidated. During my lunch break, I met with attorney Michael Fisher, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. After reviewing my documents and hearing my story, he leaned back in his chair with a troubled expression. "Mr. Osborne, what you're describing goes well beyond the typical HOA overreach I usually see. The document tampering is concerning enough, but employing armed security who attempt to detain residents, that crosses into potentially criminal behavior." "What can I do?" I asked. "Several things," he replied. "First, I'll send a cease and desist letter to the HOA regarding both the security issue and the fence dispute. Second, we'll file a formal complaint with the state about the potential impersonation of law enforcement officers. Third, I recommend you attend the next regular board meeting with me present and address these issues publicly." I agreed to his plan, and he promised to have the letters out by the end of the day. I returned to work feeling slightly more in control of the situation, but that feeling didn't last long. When I got home that evening, a crowd had gathered on my front lawn. Pamela Wilson stood at the center, surrounded by about 20 neighbors and the 2 security guards. She was holding a bullhorn. "There he is," she announced as I pulled into my driveway. "The man who thinks the rules don't apply to him." I stayed in my car and called the police before stepping out. "What's going on here, Pamela?" "We're holding an emergency neighborhood meeting to address the threat to our property values," she declared through the bullhorn. "Your fence violation is just the beginning of the decline of our community standards. This is private property," I said calmly. "You're all trespassing." One of my neighbors, an older man named Frank who lived 2 doors down, stepped forward. "Pamela, this is ridiculous. You can't just gather people on someone's lawn like this." "The common areas of Maplewood Estates are under HOA jurisdiction," she countered. "That includes the first 10 feet of every front yard according to Section 17 of the Covenant." "That's absolutely not true," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I've had enough of these made-up rules and intimidation tactics." Some of the neighbors looked uncomfortable, while others nodded in agreement with me. I noticed Linda from the HOA office standing at the back of the group, looking worried. "Mr. Osborne has repeatedly violated our community standards," Pamela continued through the bullhorn. "His fence is just one example of his blatant disregard for the aesthetic harmony of Maplewood Estates." "The fence was approved," I countered. "Pamela altered the documents after the fact, which I can prove." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Pamela's face reddened, but before she could respond, 2 police cruisers pulled up. Officers Martinez and Johnson approached the group. "What's happening here?" Officer Johnson asked. "Illegal gathering on private property," I explained. "And continued harassment by these security personnel who have been pretending to be law enforcement." Pamela lowered the bullhorn. "Officer, we're simply holding a community meeting to address concerns about property values." "The HOA has every right not on private property without the owner's permission," Officer Martinez interrupted. "Everyone needs to disperse immediately." As the crowd began to break up, Pamela pointed at me. "This isn't over, Lucas. The board will take action." The officers asked Reynolds and the younger guard to remain behind. I overheard Officer Johnson asking to see their credentials and questioning them about their activities in the neighborhood. Eventually, they too were told to leave, though Reynolds shot me another threatening look as they departed. Officer Martinez approached me. "Mr. Osborne, we've received your attorney's information from our department's legal liaison. This situation seems to be escalating. I'd like to document everything that's happened so far in an official report." I spent the next hour giving her a detailed account of all the incidents. As she was leaving, she paused. "You might want to consider installing security cameras, just in case." The next day, I did exactly that, setting up a comprehensive system covering my entire property. I also took the day off work to attend the emergency meeting at the community center, with my attorney beside me. The room was packed with residents, many of whom gave me supportive nods as I entered. Pamela called the meeting to order, her voice brittle with barely contained anger. "We're here to address the growing problem of covenant violations and the disrespect shown to our enforcement efforts." Michael Fisher raised his hand immediately. "Before we proceed, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Michael Fisher, attorney for Lucas Osborne. I'd like to address several concerning issues regarding HOA practices." Pamela's eyes widened. "This is an internal HOA matter. Attorneys aren't permitted at these meetings." "Actually," Thomas Henderson interjected, "there's nothing in our bylaws prohibiting legal representation, Pamela." Fisher stood. "I'll be brief. My client has documented evidence of document tampering, harassment by improperly identified security personnel, and attempts at illegal detention. We've already filed complaints with the appropriate authorities, but we're here today in good faith to resolve these issues without further escalation." The room erupted in murmurs. One resident stood up. "What's this about security guards detaining people? Can they do that?" "Absolutely not," Fisher replied. "Private security has no authority to detain anyone unless they've witnessed a crime in progress, and HOA violations are civil matters, not criminal ones." More residents began asking questions, and the meeting quickly spiraled beyond Pamela's control. When one homeowner mentioned that she too had experienced document changes after submitting plans for a garden shed, others began sharing similar stories. Thomas Henderson eventually called for order. "I think we need to address these allegations seriously. I move that we form an independent committee to investigate these claims and review all HOA practices and enforcement procedures." The motion passed overwhelmingly, despite Pamela's objections. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached me to express support and share their own HOA horror stories. I thought the worst was over, but the real confrontation was still to come. 2 days later, I was working from home when I heard a commotion outside. Looking through my new security camera feed, I saw 3 black SUVs blocking my driveway. Reynolds and 5 other men in the Navy uniforms were approaching my front door. This time, they were all visibly armed with tasers. I immediately called 911 and then Officer Martinez directly. "They're back and there are more of them," I told the dispatcher. "They're armed and attempting to approach my house." While waiting for the police, I opened my front door but remained inside behind my locked storm door. "You need to leave immediately," I called out. "The police are on their way." Reynolds stepped forward. "Mr. Osborne, by order of the Maplewood Estates HOA Executive Board, you are being removed from the community for repeated and willful violations of the covenant." You have 10 minutes to collect essential belongings before we escort you off the property. That's not how any of this works, I replied, holding up my phone to record. You have no legal authority to remove me from my own home. This is attempted breaking and entering and possibly kidnapping. The covenant you signed gives the HOA authority to take necessary actions to preserve community standards, he insisted, pulling out a document. Section 23, paragraph 7. I have a copy of the covenant right here, I said, holding up the binder. There is no Section 23, paragraph 7 that authorizes anything like this. One of the other guards stepped forward, reaching for what looked like a lock-picking tool. Sir, if you don't comply voluntarily, we have authorization to enter the premises and remove you. Touch my door and I'll press charges for breaking and entering, I warned. The real police are already on their way. Reynolds made a signal, and 2 guards moved toward my door while the others spread out around my house. I retreated further inside, locking the inner door as well. Through the window, I could see one guard attempting to pry open my back door while another checked the windows. When I heard glass breaking, I retreated to my home office and barricaded the door. They're breaking into my house now, I told the 911 dispatcher who was still on the line. Please hurry. I heard footsteps inside my home and shouting. Mr. Osborne, come out now. This will be easier if you cooperate. The next few minutes were the longest of my life as I listened to the intruders searching my home. When they reached my office door, they began pounding on it. Open up, Osborne. You're only making this worse for yourself. Just as I heard them trying to force the door open, sirens wailed outside. Through the window, I could see 3 police cruisers racing up the street with lights flashing. The pounding on my door stopped, and I heard rapid footsteps as the intruders retreated. I stayed put until I heard Officer Martinez's voice calling my name. When I finally emerged, I found her and 5 other officers in my living room. 2 of the security guards, including the younger one who had been with Reynolds before, were in handcuffs. Reynolds and the others had apparently fled. Are you all right, Mr. Osborne? Officer Martinez asked. Yes, I said, still shaking slightly. They broke in through the back door and were trying to force my office door open when you arrived. We've got 2 in custody, she said. APB is out for the others, including Reynolds. They're facing serious charges breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, impersonating law enforcement. As the officers processed the scene and took my statement, more police arrived, along with local news vans that had picked up the incident on the police scanner. By evening, my front yard was a circus of law enforcement, reporters, and curious neighbors. The story broke on the evening news. HOA security force attempts illegal eviction, homeowner barricaded inside. I watched the coverage from a hotel room where I was staying temporarily while my broken doors and windows were repaired. The next morning, Thomas Henderson called. Lucas, I can't believe what happened. The board never authorized anything like this. Pamela called it an emergency enforcement action without consulting anyone else. Where is she now? I asked. The police are looking for her, he replied. She's disappeared, along with Reynolds and most of the security team. Lucas, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize. We've already voted to dissolve the current security contract and launch a full audit of all HOA activities under Pamela's leadership. Over the next few days, the story grew. Police investigation revealed that Maplewood Security Enforcement wasn't a legitimate security company at all, but a group of friends and relatives of Pamela's husband, several with criminal records. They had been operating without proper licensing or training, carrying unauthorized weapons, and presenting themselves as quasi-law enforcement throughout the neighborhood for months. More homeowners came forward with stories of intimidation, illegal fines, and document tampering. The state attorney's office opened an investigation into the HOA's financial records, discovering that nearly $300,000 in homeowner fees had been diverted to shell companies controlled by Pamela and her husband over the past 3 years. A week after the break-in, Reynolds and 3 other security guards were arrested at a motel just across the state line in New York. 2 days later, Pamela and her husband were found at their vacation home in the Poconos and taken into custody. The charges were extensive: fraud, embezzlement, falsifying documents, conspiracy, hiring unlicensed security, breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, and impersonating law enforcement officers. The case made national news, becoming a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. In the aftermath, our community underwent a transformation. A completely new board was elected, with Thomas Henderson as president and Linda Zhao as secretary. The covenant was revised to limit HOA powers and increase transparency. My fence, needless to say, was officially approved. 6 months later, I sat on my back deck, enjoying the privacy of my contested fence while grilling with some neighbors who had become friends through our shared HOA nightmare. "You know," said Frank, raising his beer, "in a weird way we should thank Pamela. This neighborhood is closer than ever because of what we went through." "I could have done without armed men breaking into my house," I laughed, "but I'll drink to better neighbors and a better HOA." As we clinked bottles, my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline read, "Former HOA president pleads guilty in security force scandal, faces up to 15 years. Justice had been served and my fence was still standing." In the year since the Maplewood Militia incident, as local papers dubbed it, our community has become something of a model for HOA reform. Lawyers and homeowner rights advocates frequently cite our case when pushing for legislation to curb HOA powers and increase accountability. I still live in Maplewood Estates, though I now serve on the Architectural Review Committee. My infamous fence has become something of a local landmark, the fence that brought down a suburban tyrant. The final tally was impressive: 10 attempted arrests by fake HOA security, 8 people charged with various felonies, and over $400,000 in restitution ordered to be paid back to the HOA treasury. Pamela Wilson received an 8-year sentence after her plea deal, while Reynolds got 5 years for his role in the scheme. Sometimes when I'm enjoying my backyard, I think about how something as simple as a cedar fence led to uncovering a years-long fraud operation and changed the lives of an entire community. It's a reminder that standing up for what's right, even when it would be easier to back down, can make a difference. And yes, the fence looks great.